Today, I just want to talk about a few of the tools that I use to paint trees with. So let's jump into that. Now, I did a lot of experimentation and I found which of my brushes work for me. But obviously there are endless amount of brushes out there, so you need to go find and experiment with your brushes and see what works for you. But I am going to talk about the type of effects that you get with different brushes typically, so that you know what to look for and what might help you. First off, we have these fan brushes. In the sketchbook here, this is the fan brush that I used for this bottom image, and then this is the fan brush that I used for the top part of this tree. This one was a little bit more expensive. The bristles are a bit more stiff and structured, while this other one is a lot more all over the place. These bristles move a lot easier, but they're also a bit harsher, a bit coarser. So you can see with this image here that the paint is pretty structured and there's not a lot of blending between colors and there's not a lot of fine details. The areas of paint are a bit larger. It applies very nicely. The only thing that you need to keep in mind when applying paint with this brush is that you have these lines of application, and to break that I just turn my brush to the side and apply like this and this, and also turn it around a lot. Now with this image right here, with this brush, you can see this brush is a bit more all over the place and there's a lot of small texture here and also some more brush texture in the paint itself. There's also a lot more blending between colors when you apply it, and all in all I did find this brush to apply a little bit more difficult than the other one. But this is also the cheaper brush, so it does make sense that it's a bit more difficult to work with. Next up, we'll look at some round brushes. This brush was a very nicely structured round brush, but it has just had its years of service, so it looks a little bit worse for the wear, but it makes it perfect for painting trees because we can get all of that nice texture with the bristles that are sticking out at the sides. This brush is also one of the cheaper, more coarser brushes, and it creates also a different effect. So let me show you here. This image right here was created with this brush. You can see, as with the coarse fan brush, there is a lot of texture in here. And I also used this brush to paint the pine tree in my previous tree painting videos. So you can also use it to create that texture. I found that it doesn't apply the paint as thickly as some of the other brushes that I have. So you have these small blue parts sticking through and it creates the texture. Let me show you up close. You can see that there is a lot of texture and that the paint isn't applied as thickly there. So this is the type of effect that this brush creates, and I think it's because it has very stiff, coarse bristles. And then this image was painted with this old red brush. It has softer bristles, but it's still structured, and you can see the effect that it creates. It creates those small, nice little texture dots at the end, but the color application is still good and there's still solid areas of color in there. So I really think that this is a good choice of brush to paint a tree with. Let's look at these two flat brushes and how they performed. This one is a super nice brush. It has very structured but still soft bristles. And then this one is the friend of that other round brush. You can see it's also older. The bristles have started to separate here. So they both also create very distinct techniques. Let's look at the first one that was painted with the red brush. So here you can see you have that flat brush application. There are lines there as I applied it, but I still have a little bit of texture here around the edges. That's probably from the bristles sticking out at the sides. So it's a good application. And there's definitely areas in which you can use it, but I think there are better brushes for painting trees. But it's a very specific effect, and if you want to create a lot of different trees and you want to have them look different to one another, using this brush as well as a bunch of other brushes for the different trees will definitely create that effect. So that's good. And then we move on to the newer flat brush. So you can see that these strokes are very structured, and this is also a very nice look. I'm actually quite fond of this more gouache look, like flat color spaces that's separated by harsher lines and a lot less blending. So if you want to create that effect, you might want to consider a flat brush, but you can see around the edges that there's not a lot of small leaf texture. So you might be using this one to paint a tree with larger leaves, and just be aware of the effect that it will create if you use this, but it is also nice. I also really like it. Here I have one filbert brush that I tried out, and I know the tree looks a little bit dotty, but that's actually what the tree looked like. So this brush really did apply the effect that I wanted, and that worked great. So if you have a tree that's a little bit more dotty and you want to create small circle-like shapes, I do recommend using a small filbert. But if you want to create nice leaf textures, this might not be the best brush to use, but it does work well for a certain purpose. Now it's time for my favorite ones, the two angled brushes. These brushes work really great for trees. If you've seen one of my previous videos, you would have known that this brush literally changed the way that I painted trees. It's because you can make these small round dots that you see here while still using the flat edge to make larger, flatter strokes. And you can make thin, pointy strokes, as you can see here, and there's also thin ones. And it just has a lot of variety in one brush. You can get the same effect by just using a flat and a round brush, but then you need to keep track of two brushes, and who wants to do that? So definitely recommend trying one of these out if you haven't already, and if you have the finances to get one, these are great. I actually want to share something really exciting with you. I developed 2 cheat sheets and a guide looking at the most common tree painting mistakes and how you can fix it. The guide has illustrations, it has real life examples on real pictures of trees, and it has easy points that you can implement to make your tree paintings look better. I'll put the link in the description and most probably in the comment section as well. It's free, you can just download it. Alright, back to this video. Let's jump onto something different now and look at the sponge. I have seen a lot of people on YouTube use sponges to create interesting textures on paintings, and I'm going to be honest, I was a bit skeptical. I've never actually used a sponge when painting because I could always get the effects that I wanted with brushes. I never felt the need to use a sponge. But then when this tree video came along, I decided to experiment a bit, and the results actually surprised me a lot. This sponge creates beautiful textures here on the outside of the tree. It blends interestingly. It's not really like a brush in that sense. It does blend a little bit too much for my taste, but I think that's just because when you use it, it picks up a lot of paint. So there's always a lot of paint smearing around on your canvas, but definitely try this out. It creates really nice edge textures for the tree, and I'm sure there's a lot of other applications that you can use it for as well. I was surprised by this one. Next up, I tried to paint with a palette knife. Now this is just a cheap plastic one that I purchased recently, so I don't know how it compares with a metal one. I do have a metal one, but I didn't use it. I just used this one, and it definitely creates an interesting texture. You can see that the paint is applied very thickly, and I feel like you're almost always going to get that when working with a palette knife. Just keep that in mind. So if you like this really thick paint application technique, then a palette knife might just be what you need. It is a little bit difficult, I'm going to warn you. Getting the highlights and the shadows and not mushing everything together on the paper, on the canvas, or whatever you're working on is a little bit difficult, and it uses a lot of paint. But if you're looking for something a little bit different, something that gives a bit of texture to your painting, I recommend trying out a palette knife as well. And the last thing that I experimented with is this little piece of cotton. Although it wasn't actually this piece, the piece that I experimented with looks much less white. I experimented with using cotton wool to apply the paint, and it was just a big fat mess. Like, my hands got so messy from the paint, and the paint just soaked into the cotton wool so much, and it didn't want to blend properly, it didn't want to apply properly, and it started looking really gunky and really dirty, and I don't think the outcomes are really worth it. It looks like a tree, sure, but I feel like you could have gotten the same effect or even a better effect with one of the tools that I previously mentioned in this video. So this one, 100% do not recommend, except if you really like smearing paint all over yourself and being frustrated, then this one's definitely for you. And then I just want to give an honorary mention to this small round brush. The reason that I didn't talk about this one separately really is because I use it in every painting. When I'm finished with the leaves, I go back in with this one to highlight those small little branches and to fix a few details here and there. If I feel like something's looking a little bit wonky somewhere, I'll go in and fix it with this brush, because this brush has a lot of precision. I know exactly where I'm painting when I'm painting with it, but you can't paint a whole tree with this one. It will take absolutely forever because it's so small. Alright, that is it for this video.